So, morning everybody. I often think that the best thinking happens in response to good questions. So our question for this morning's session is emotion at work credible? If so, why? And if not, why not? My worry is that emotion at work isn't credible. My worry is that emotion at work is something that is actually, what I'm going to use the term as uncredible. It's something that we don't really talk about, that we don't explore the power of, we don't proactively plan for it, and we don't openly think about and build around what emotions are happening in the workplace and why. Now I find that really interesting because emotions are actually there for our own welfare. Our emotions have evolved over time to keep us alive and to enrich our lives. And in which case then, why would we not talk about them at work? Why would they be uncredible at work? And in which case, if we don't talk about them, actually, they're doing us harm. Are we doing ourselves harm by making emotion at work uncredible? Are we actually de-enriching, if that's even a word, our lives in some way or some form? Now, I think we do, because otherwise, why would something like Simon Sinek's video about this idea of 3 circles and starting with why and purpose really engage a whole load of people behind it? Also, why would the state of emotional health and mental health in the UK workplace be as bad as it is if emotion at work was credible? So I was also really interested in about, well, you guys are all from finance, so what makes a credible finance person? So I asked Sarah, I asked Mike, I got some comments back, and some of those are showing up on screen now. Is it about authenticity or control or respect or decision making? But what we notice is actually emotion in an explicit way is absent from all of those things. It's implied a little bit in communicator and a little bit in courage and in sense of control, but it's always around control. Emotion must be controlled, must be managed in that way. And I think that's just really limiting as an approach to emotion at work. So that leads me to worry then, well, is emotion and finance uncredible, but also is just emotion in the workplace in general uncredible? And I believe it is. And then I also wonder then, well, how have we got to this point? How have we got to a point where emotion at work is uncredible? Because emotion is everywhere. Emotion is all around us. And emotion in particular, if we think about finance as an example, both in the financial decisions that individuals make, but also in the financial decisions that investors make. Emotion is hugely present, and there's been lots of research done into it, and I've just cited a few of them at the bottom for you there. There's a big reference list at the end, which I'll share with you. Emotion is also present between people, though. It's present in interaction. It's present right here, right now, between you and me, between people in this room. Things that I'm saying, stuff that I'm talking about is triggering emotion in you. And if we don't talk about it, well, that worries me. And likewise, emotion is also present in us as individuals. Emotion changes us physically. It changes the speed of our heart rate. It changes the amount that we sweat. You wouldn't want me to put my arms out like this right now. Emotion changes us, and we need to think about how we manage that. And one way to manage that is to make sure that at different times we take a breath. So I'm just going to pause for breath. Okay, why did I want to pause for breath? Because I was getting all excited. Emotion was rife at that particular point. Also though, because breath is something that we always have with us and we can take with us. And I want to next go into, well, how have we got to this point where emotion at work is uncredible? What is it that's happened that's got us here? Because there are lots of different ways to manage emotion at work. And I think and I alluded to this earlier on, I think there's one dominant one, which is about how do we modulate our emotional responses? How do we manage our individual emotional responses to things? And in particular, we squish them or we push them down. So this idea of control, I must control my emotions, I must not show them, because if I display these emotions openly, I am going to be deemed as uncredible. And often emotion is then seen as this outpouring of emotion, that this big kind of, emotion just comes out all at once, or it's about a big explosion of emotion, a big spike of anger or frustration or sadness or fear or offence or whatever it is. But my worry is that these big explosions are the stuff that make emotion uncredible, because what we see are these massive big spikes of emotion at different times, as opposed to a constant ongoing management of emotion to make it much more credible. And I want to get to a point where emotion is something that we explore openly, that we discuss. So when we sit down with people, we don't just say, how's your work going, or how's it going, or how are you going? We say, how are you feeling? How are you feeling today? Because I want to make a shift. I've talked about emotion being uncredible, and for me it's not about a shift to make emotion credible. I want to make emotion something else. I want to do something that recognises the power that emotion has, that recognises the evolutionary history that we have with emotion, that recognises the function that emotion is here to enrich our lives and to make our lives better. I want emotion at work to be incredible.
Hi there, my name is Zook and Phil has asked me to introduce this next piece for you guys. So what you just experienced was an Ignite presentation. The purpose of it is to introduce a topic or set a context or stimulate thought and discussion for you. The presenter has to deliver 20 slides in 15 seconds and the timings move on automatically, so there's no chance that you can control it. The challenges in doing this are that you have to crystallize what you're going to say down to 5 minutes and you have to deliver it coherently. I hope Phil did that, and I'm sure he did actually. So Phil has 3 intentions for your session today. The first is to provoke thought around how does a business think and approach the topic of emotion at work. To provoke thought in you and how you think, feel and approach the topic of emotion at work. And he's going to be helpful in giving some insights, tools and resources to you that you can use and the business can use for the future. So you've got about 35 minutes left and he's going to expand on all these in the rest of his talk. For now, he has a request for you. He wants you to take 2 minutes to consider the next 3 questions, which are going to be up on a slide in a moment. And these are, how do you feel about what was said? What emotion did you experience in those 5 minutes? And what are you left thinking or feeling now? Post-it notes are going to be given out. Thanks for watching and hope you enjoy the rest of the session. Phil, back to you, buddy.
So there's post-it notes at the end of the rows. So if you could grab some post-it notes and pass them along for me, that'd be lovely. If there's not enough, I have more. And here are your 3 questions. Okay, so I feel like I can properly say hello now. There's just a couple of small sort of housekeeping stuff that I want to do. I don't know if you can see it, if you can or not, then there's a phone on like a tripod thing on this table over here. That's because we're live on Periscope. So Periscope is an app that allows you to stream stuff out to the big wide world. So we're streaming live. Hello everybody on Periscope. So we're streaming live out at the moment. Well, I know we've got a few people following because there's some interesting discussions going on Twitter about some of the stuff that we're talking about. So just so you know, that's happening, but the camera's on me, so they can't see any of you. But the camera's on me. All right, so I'd be interested to know then, what were some of your thoughts? So how do you feel about what was said?
Anxious and nervous.
Anxious and nervous because?
When they said about how many slides were going to come out and you've got to say what you need to say in 5 minutes, I find that quite hard if I don't have time to prep.
Okay, so that was just for me. So you don't have to worry about that. That's good for you. If you want to do an Ignite though, they are amazing. The practice of doing it is brilliant. But you're okay. You can just sit safely and not have to worry. Okay. What else?
I thought it was refreshing
Okay.
to hear you talk about emotion because I think it's a bit taboo.
Good. Wonderful. I like that. And that's part of the problem, I think, that it is taboo. And one of the things that I'll come on to later is this idea of what's allowed and what's not allowed and what rules do we have around that. And I think you're right. I think emotion is taboo in the workplace. So wonderful. Thank you. Okay.
I think it's scary as well, dealing with other people's emotions. So showing your own emotions, then working with other people's emotions is quite scary sometimes.
Good, I agree. So on one hand, there's possibly some apprehension around managing our own emotions, but if we then ask the question of how are you feeling, if I get a response back that actually I'm just really sad today, how am I going to deal with that? Yeah, okay, good. I like that too. All right, what else?
I think there's always a feeling of you need to show positivity in a workplace, and we'll often ask people how we're feeling, and obviously you want people to be honest, but actually how honest are people when you ask them? And if someone did say, "Oh, I'm not that great," you want to support them, but actually, if someone asked me how I was feeling, I would always generally say, "Oh, fine, happy," because I want to show positivity. So it's putting your guard down to actually share and be honest with people about actually how you're really feeling.
Absolutely. So I think that there's almost an expectation that I need to be positive, I need to be okay, and I need to be able to see the positive stuff in it. And often emotion is, for me, emotion is polarised in these two ways. It's either positive or negative. And I think it's they're inaccurate terms, and B, it's an unhelpful polarisation. Because emotions actually do an awful lot of constructive stuff too, and we'll come on to that a bit later on, so I'll come back to that a bit later. Okay? Any particular emotions that you were experiencing that you noticed?
I've got a few. I think first of all was pride. There's a lot of people from my team in the room, and I'm really happy that they're here because I think it's really important. A sense of vindication because I think emotion's good, and I think that I was struggling with the difference between credibility and strength and weakness, or good and bad. I thought that was good, and I was really concerned for you as a friend of mine who was talking, and you were on auto slide. I was thinking, oh my God, what if somebody asks a question? Like, we've got this for 45 minutes. What's going to happen? So it's brilliant that one of your colleagues was on there to help explain it. Yeah.
Good. Yes, and thank you, sir. He's watching, so thank you, sir, for doing my segue. Thank you. Okay, good. So some pride, some vindication, and some kind of interest in what's going to come and what's going to come next. Good. All right. So I want you to keep a note of whatever it was, because what we're going to do in the coming slides and the rest of this session is talk about the different emotion triggers. So what triggers are associated to what emotions, and how do they all link together. And we'll also explore this positive, negative, constructive, destructive aspects. We'll talk about those sorts of things as well. All right. So the first thing I want to do then, as I just alluded to, is I want to talk about triggers. Now, you'll be pleased to know that the trigger for the slides is now in my hand. So I get to move the slides on now when I'm ready, which is good. So the thing about triggers are that they are a real mix of nature and nurture. So sometimes there's a big debate around personality profiling, for example. Is personality nature, nurture? But when it comes to emotions, emotions are nature and nurture. They're both. Okay, they're both things combined together. We have some evolutionary things that are hardwired into us. There are some universal triggers, all of which I'll share with you this morning, that are hardwired into us. And then as time progresses, as we grow, we have experiences, we then start to build new triggers on top of those pre-programmed ones. Okay? So, for example, if you were to hold a, not that I have ever done this, but if you were to hold a baby up there and then drop them and catch them, they would experience fear. That's the loss of gravity is a pre-programmed trigger for fear. That would just happen. I wouldn't encourage you to do that, by the way, just as an example. That will already be there. What we then do as time goes by is we start to learn, we have new experiences, and we start to put other triggers on top of those. So they're a mix of both nature and nurture. And the other thing about triggers is that they can be one of three things. They can be real. And what I mean by real are they can be actual experiences that occur. So there were certain things that I was saying that were triggering emotions in you. So they were real things, what I'm going to class as real things, actual physical experiences that you have. Some that could be things that you see, things that you hear, things that you smell, things that you taste. Anything that comes through any of those senses, then I'm going to define as real. They can also be imagined, and we're going to play with this a bit later on. So if you imagine something, then it will also trigger emotions for you. You can also trigger emotions through reliving them, also known as remembering. So when you remember stuff that has happened to you, you can re-experience those emotions again. So sometimes these emotions are in your direct control. So you could go to the movies and you could watch a real tearjerker of a film. So you could choose to go and watch a sad film because you want to have a real trigger, which is some stimulus that's presented to you, which is a movie, and you want to then feel that emotion. Also, you can relive it as often as you want. If you have a particular experience that you're really proud of, or that makes you really happy, or even that makes you really sad if you want to, you can go back and remember that as many times as you want, and you can choose those emotions to happen to you. They will also happen to you in an unbidden way, though. So they'll happen to you in a way where you don't choose to do it, they just occur because of the stimulus that are around you. So one for me, as soon as a lady walks past me with a Jean Paul Gaultier perfume, I'm instantly transported back to night when I was 17 with a girl called Esther Coffin. That's a good memory. Okay. So thinking about all the different emotions then, so there are 7 universal emotions, and what I mean by that is there are 7 emotions that their expression is universal. So the look of each of these emotions looks the same on everybody's face, irrespective of ethnicity, background, upbringing, culture, any of all of that stuff. These emotions all look the same. And the advantage of that is that because we know they're universal, we also know what the universal triggers are. So what we have here is anger. Now, anger has evolved as an emotion with a purpose or with a trigger of obstruction to a goal. So if we have a goal that we want to achieve and something is put in the way, then emotion is triggered. How many people, when they drive to work, happily driving along, somebody cuts in front of them and you have a spike of... Okay? Because you have an obstruction to your goal, which is somebody's coming in front of you. So the pre-programmedness of it is that if somebody or something gets in our way, then anger will help us remove that obstruction. Again, not that I've ever done it, but if you were to get a 2-year-old toddler, put their favourite toy over here, and then hold them so they can't move, so they can't go and get it, you can watch their face contort into something like that. Again, not that I've ever done that. Anger also, though, has a very constructive application. So anger is what drives change. Anger as an emotion is what makes change happen. So I think about what happened in Paris on Friday, for example. And there's been quite a few quotes that have been going around on the internet from Martin Luther King about it's not darkness that drives out darkness, it's light. Okay? But the key word for me in that sentence is drive. It's action. It's removal of that light. It's pushing that darkness away. And that's driven by anger. Because anger will drive change. And it's about whether it's done in a constructive way or a destructive way. So my definition of constructive is in a way where it builds relationships with other people and it encourages collaboration. Destructive is in a way that breaks down relationships with other people and encourages individualism. So anger can be a wonderful emotion to harness to drive change. So if you want to drive change in an organisation, find a way to harness anger in a constructive way, and you are more likely to get change to happen. If people are just kind of generally okay with change, then it ain't going to happen. Anger is a wonderful emotion to drive that change that can go with it. We also have disgust. So the universal trigger for disgust is something that we find offensive. Now, evolutionary-wise, disgust as an emotion evolved to keep us safe in terms of us ingesting things that we shouldn't ingest. So us eating food that we shouldn't eat and those sorts of things. So there's an interesting study done with toddlers where a mum or their caregiver would sit in front of them with 3 boxes, and as they put their hand on top of the box, they'd make a different facial expression, or they'd keep it neutral. And when they put their hand on top of the one box and did that at the same time, the child would statistically choose that box less than the other 2. So when I say that these expressions of emotion, these emotions are hardwired in us, the recognition of them is hardwired in it too. And we find disgust when we have something that we find offensive. Now that could be something that we find offensive in terms of who likes eating, or actually Sarah, would you mind just popping outside for me and getting those trays of liver and kidney for me so people can come in and eat them?
Yeah, not a problem.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Okay, so how do we feel about eating liver and kidney? It's not cooked, by the way, it's nice and raw. Not bothered? Okay, we got a lovely disgust face going on here. So anything that we find offensive will trigger that emotion in us. Now, it's not just about food though, it's also about what we might find morally offensive. So who here thinks it's really, really important to be on time for a meeting? Okay, so there could be 2 emotions that are going on there. Okay, so it could be anger, in that you have a goal, which is I want to start this meeting on time because I've probably got another one to go to. But there's things I want to discuss. Or it could be disgust because you could be offended by the fact that people just aren't giving you the damn courtesy to turn up on time. Okay, so disgust isn't just about food, it's about what we may find morally offensive as well. So if something goes against our values, if something goes against something that we hold strong, it could be, if we're offended by it, that disgust as an emotion is triggered. Now we also have contempt. Contempt is probably the one emotion where I have to work the hardest to find a constructive application of. So contempt is about when you feel morally superior to somebody else. So that's when you feel you're better than someone else. Now by its definition then, you've got to think, well, how can there be a constructive application of that? How can there be an application which builds relationships and builds collaboration when the emotion is about feeling morally superior? Now, I would argue that in some contexts, in the military context in particular, there's a constructive application of contempt, where you haven't got the time or the luxury or the culture demands that hierarchical structure. So in that context, I can imagine that contempt from a senior officer to a junior officer has a potentially constructive application. Otherwise, then less so. Because of the moral bit that sits behind it. Okay. We also have fear. We've talked about fear a lot today, already even, and it's only 10:28. So the evolutionary trigger for fear is a threat of harm. So that evolutionary-wise, that comes from predators, for example, from us being attacked and caught and eaten by other people. More recently, though, there's many, many more threats to that. So that could be threat of harm to our identity. So that came about earlier on when somebody said, it's taboo, or I'm not sure if it's okay to talk about emotion in that way. Because if I do, what harm is that going to do to my credibility? Or what harm is that going to do to how people see me, or how people view me, or how people perceive my contribution to this meeting? If I say, well, actually, you know what, I'm really annoyed, actually, because this isn't good enough. What we're doing right now is not good enough, and we need to make it better. Am I okay to express that? Because if I do, are people going to think I'm being destructive, or that I'm trying to be obstinate or put obstacles in the way? Actually, I've just got something that I want to achieve, and I think we can do it better. But fear can hold us back from that, because it can be about the threat of harm physically, in terms of us being physically injured, so it could also be our perceived threat to our sense of identity or our competence or any of those sorts of things. Surprise. Surprise is when something sudden and unexpected happens. Surprise is that thing where you get a notification through, is it Link? Is that the instant messaging notification that you guys use? Yeah? Where you get a notification through Link, or somebody arrives at your desk and go, "Where are you? You're meant to be at a meeting," and you go, "Oh!" That's surprise. When something sudden and unexpected happens. And what surprise does is it helps orientate you to whatever that is. So it helps you go, "Oh!" and orientate you to wherever it needs you to be, or wherever it is that you should be. And surprise is a really, really brief emotion. Because surprise is something that takes us on a journey to somewhere else. So when you do get that Link message that pops up that says, "Where are you? Meant to be at a meeting," you go, "Oh!" and then you go, "Oh no, I'm really late." So it could be surprise into anger. Or it could be surprise into fear of, "Oh no, what are people going to think of me? The fact I forgot about the meeting and they're really important to me. Oh no, what am I going to do? Ah." So surprise is a journey on to another emotion. Or it could be surprise where you get to that meeting room first and you're the first one there and you go, "No one else is here. I can be all smug today. I'm the person who arrived early." Okay. Then we have sadness. And sadness is about loss. And sadness is about loss of something we value. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a physical thing. It can be a physical thing. So often sadness and loss is attributed with people passing away and so on. It actually can be loss of lots of other things. So it can be loss of I'll do that one. So I had a theory back in sort of 2008 to 2011 where we created a depressed society, because what we had is trigger upon trigger upon trigger upon trigger upon trigger of sadness. Because what was happening in the workplace was people were losing their friends, they were losing their benefits, they were losing their holidays, they were losing their luxury goods, they were losing all of these things. So we had loss upon loss upon loss upon loss upon loss upon loss. So actually what ended up happening is, in a lot of workplaces especially, where there was a slow kind of degradation of employee benefits. Also, we'll kind of take away this, and then we'll take away that, and then we'll take away that, and then we'll take away that. The compoundness of that led to an overwhelming feeling of sadness, I believe, because we had that repeated over and over again. And what we need to remember is that can then lead to other emotions as well. So if, for example, there was a workplace that decided to take away milk and replace it with powder stuff, it could be that sadness then tipped into anger, for example. That could be a thing. Okay, and finally we'll finish on something happy. So happiness then is something pleasurable. So anything that we deem to be pleasurable. That could be, that could be back to my Jean Paul Gaultier perfume story. That could be seeing family, that could be friends, that could be seeing a piece of work done really well, that could be seeing a member of your team develop and flourish. Anything that we deem to be pleasurable will trigger happiness. And again, I've talked about constructive, destructive. There's a destructive application of happiness. How many people have watched someone else fail and laugh? Okay? And when I say, so that could be fail in like a big scale, or it could just be fail as in fall over, so they fail to be able to walk properly. So there's a wonderful video on YouTube of this hiker lady who's kind of trying to jump over this cow muck. And she tries to jump, her foot gets caught, she goes over the grass and lands face first in the cow poo. And everybody laughs. But if you were that lady, would you find that funny? No. Have any of you ever lost contact with friends, even for like a day or 2 days, over something you've laughed at that they didn't think was funny at all? Yeah? So there's destructive applications of happiness as well. So all of these emotions have constructive and destructive applications. So it's not just always about being happy. There are deconstructive bits around being happy. So those are the universal triggers. One of the things that Suk said earlier on that I wanted to do, one of my intentions for today, was to be helpful. So there's lots and lots of references that are cited as we've worked our way through. Any of those research papers that are openly available, I've got and I've saved together in a single folder, which I'm going to give to Sarah later. So if any of you want them, you can have them. There are also some links to some books, which if you want to read more about emotion, you'll get wonderful joy from reading those books as well. So anything that I talk about today, any studies that I reference, then I'll give you either the links to the papers if they're publicly available, or links off to the books if you want to go and buy them on Amazon or other places that are available too. All right. So these are 2 stills from a video. That's the opening one. That's the opening picture, and then it goes to this one. Who would like? I've got the video queued up. Who would like me to press play?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a few, and some saying yes vigorously. Oh yes. All right. So on a scale of 1 to 10, those that don't want me to play it, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much don't you want me to play it? So if you're a 10, put your hand up. Okay. If you don't want me to play it and you're a 9, keep your 10s, keep your hands up. If you don't want me to play it and you're a 9, put your hand up. And 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, so 3 and 2. That's when the majority went up. So that, for me, that's really interesting. It's the same thing. Okay, I know you're even sweating. You've even got really red. Let me move on. There you go. Okay, I haven't really got it queued up. It's okay. But my point being that even though these triggers are universal, we all experience emotion differently. So different things trigger us. So I've used it twice, I'll use it a third time. Jean-Paul Gaultier, pleasurable trigger for me, absolutely. But anybody else here get positive, happy from smelling that perfume? No, that's just me. So what triggers us can be really different. So what some people can find really frustrating, other people it doesn't bother at all. What some people can find really offensive doesn't bother anybody else at all. And we had that as well earlier with the, if somebody's late to meetings, does that bother you? Those that said yes, and others said no. And again, there's different intensities to it. So some people were a 10. Yes, I'm a 10, don't press play. And other people are like a 2 or a 3. So the same stimulus, and I won't put it back up, those 2 pictures, now you're reliving them, those 2 pictures caused the same emotion, which was fear, but at a very different level. Some people all the way up here, some people all the way down here. Some people not even at all. Actually, there was an element of intrigue and interest, and yes, I want to see it. If you want the link to it, I can give you. It's a great video. But the point being that because we are all different, because we all experience emotion in different ways, because we're triggered by different things, what that means is it's really hard for us to know what makes us emotionally charged. What is it that triggers those emotions in us? So you might be now thinking, well, why is Phil sharing all of this stuff? Why am I sharing all of it? So for me, there's 4 reasons. Knowing the triggers helps you identify what the emotions were. So when you go back and you look through your notes for the 3 questions I asked you this morning, when you've written down things that you thought or felt about what you heard, or you wrote down the emotions that you experienced, or you wrote down what you're thinking and feeling about emotions now, you can use those 7 triggers to try and work out which emotion it was. So if you wrote down, for example, I wish we could talk about emotions more at work, then you can start to think, well, what emotion's behind that? Is that anger driving that? Because actually, I wish we could. There's a goal I want to achieve, which is where emotion at work is credible, and we can talk about that in a really open way. Then anger could be the emotion that drives behind that. I wanted to give you the triggers so that you can use them as a way to help you identify what emotions you're experiencing. What that can give you then is increased awareness. One of the things that I talked about was how emotion is different in us physically. So each emotion has different physiological reactions. So if we have fear, for example, the body will shut down your intestinal tract. So you'll have noticed as I've been going on speaking, my mouth is getting drier and drier. And sometimes you hear type sound. That's because even though I've love this topic, I'm still speaking in front of a big group of people. So there's an element of apprehension there. which means that fear is shutting down all of this stuff. Shuts down your saliva, shuts down all of those things because you don't need them. I do some coaching sometimes with people that want to do public speaking, and what I say to them is in the last half an hour before you go on stage, you make sure you are near a toilet, because trust me, you're going to need it. Okay? Because in fear, it doesn't need any of this stuff, it doesn't need any of this, so it just shuts it down or expels it from you in different ways. So anyway, increased awareness then can help you, because if you know what emotion you're experiencing, you can then start to work out, well, how can I apply that constructively? How can I do something with this emotion that builds relationships and builds collaboration? It also, though, can lead to better outcomes. So it can lead to outcomes where we haven't got those big explosions or those big spikes of emotion, where we're dealing with it much more as it occurs on a day-to-day basis. So it leads to better outcomes for you in terms of your physical health, your mental health, your well-being, and all of those things. And the other thing to remember is that context really matters. So when it comes to emotion, where you are, who you're with, what you're talking about, what's happening around you, all of those things are hugely important. Because it might be that what triggered you was the person who was saying something. It might be that what triggered you was what they said. It might be that if you put you in a meeting with your peers and you need to give an update on your project, you're okay. But if one of the FLT walks in, all of a sudden the apprehension levels rise a little bit. So context really matters. And emotions are also affected by other things. So they're affected by sleep, how well rested you are. Emotions and sleep go really, really well together. Emotions can stop you sleeping, and stopping you sleeping can make it much more difficult to manage your emotions effectively. There's also, depending on what time in the day and when you've recently eaten, those things can also affect emotions as well. There was a really interesting study done on judges who had to give parole decisions. And if the judge was presented with the same case at 8:50 in the morning and 4:35 in the afternoon, you had an 80% more likelihood to get parole if you were presented at 8:50 than at 4:35. So context really matters. So if you've got something important that you know you need to do, doing it, and it's something that's going to be really emotionally charged for you, doing it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, if you're tired and haven't been well rested during the day, may not necessarily be the best option. Okay, so how do we manage emotion at work? One is through situation selection or situation modification. So this is where you make a deliberate choice to opt in or opt out of the trigger, or you modify it. So to give you an example, it might be that if you find presenting particularly fearful, if that triggers a lot of emotion in you, then you could modify that. So you could select a different situation and not present anymore. So you could find a way of saying, well, I'm not going to present anymore. That's just something that I don't want to do. It makes me too anxious, it makes me too nervous, I don't want to do it anymore, I'm not going to bother. Or you modify it in that you change the way you present. So you might say, okay, I'm not comfortable standing up in front of a great big room and doing an Ignite presentation, but actually, if I was to make it a bit more informal, just stealing this chat, sorry. If I was to make it a bit more informal and do it in kind of more of a discussion-based way, actually, that feels okay. So I'm not removing the trigger completely, I'm just modifying it to make it more acceptable and more okay for them. So once you know what your triggers are, you can then start to say, well, okay, if that's a trigger for me, can I not experience that trigger anymore, or can I modify it? A good example would be a friend of mine, she witnessed a car accident on the way to work one day. She chose not to drive that route to work anymore. Because every time she went along that road, it triggered all of the memories and the emotions that came with it. She chose not to do it. So hers was a situational selection of, I'm just going to drive a different route to work. Okay, we can also talk about attentional deployments. Oh, we don't like cats, do we? So we can talk about attentional deployments, which is where we choose to focus our attention in a different way. So often that might be if somebody is particularly, coming back to the point about how do you manage it in others as well. So attentional deployment can be a way where you use humour to distract. which is exactly what I did there, thank you. So it can be where somebody is saying, I don't know, they're sad or they're frustrated or whatever it is, and you direct their attention elsewhere. You distract them through, that might be humour or through other means. But the point is you take whatever it was that was making them experience that emotion, you take their attention away from that and you put it somewhere else. And you can do that proactively, or you can do that reactively. So you can either do that within yourself, or you can do it with other people. And there's two papers that I've got on this that I'll tell you more about it. You could also have a cognitive change, or what's sometimes called a reframe, which is where we take a trigger and we look to refocus it in a different way. So, okay, you find giving Ignite presentations quite fearful. Think about the development opportunity that could be in that with you. If you can get really good at not needing to look at your slides and they just tip on every 15 seconds and you can do that really fluently, imagine how good you could be if you actually got control over the presentation. That would be amazing. So it's not removing the trigger, it's reframing it. So you look at it differently. So it's different from attentional redeployment. Attentional redeployment is where you take someone's attention from there to there. This is where you keep the attention there, but you get them to kind of take a different perspective and a different angle on it. So you take a different look at it. And then finally, there's response modulation. And this is the one that I think is most prevalent in work, which is where you take the response and you modulate it. So if it's a 10, I'm not allowed to show that 10, so I'll squish it down to make it like a 4. You know, I'm going to hold it down, I'm not going to let it out. Response modulation can work the other way, where you actually amplify it, so you can make it bigger, which sometimes can be helpful if, for example, we'll use that example. So if you find that with a particular person, let's say with a line manager or a colleague, you seem to find yourself being quite kind of passive and so on, even though you're feeling quite frustrated, that you, instead of putting that frustration down, you let it grow, you let it come out, you amplify it to make it bigger, to give you more of a voice in that way. Often though in the workplace, though, for me, this is the primary one. It's don't show. Squish it down, put it away, don't let it show, it's not appropriate, it's uncredible, put it away. Don't let it out. And for me, that's just really unhelpful. It doesn't allow you to process the emotion because you're constantly pushing it down. It means that when it does come, it comes as that big outpouring of emotion, or that big explosion, as opposed to it being managed as you go. And also, it doesn't reflect the fact that that emotion has been triggered because of something that you deem important to your welfare. And by someone else saying to you, either directly or implying, squish it down, that implies that what's important to you doesn't matter. And how debilitating is that? Yeah, anger, sorry. Okay. All right. And this is where we come to, I forgot to put the citation. This is where we come to two things called display rules and allowable contributions. So display rules are when we're allowed to show stuff or not on our faces, for example. So if anybody knows, has been to, or comes from, say, a Far East culture, if you're young and you're in the presence of somebody older than you, culturally you're not allowed to show emotion. You're not allowed to express it. You're not allowed to show that emotion on your face. You have to squish it and squash it and put it down. So a display rule is around what you're not allowed to show, what you're allowed to show and not show. An allowable contribution is more about what you're allowed to say and not say. And this is where it's not okay to say, well, actually, I'm really angry about that. That really frustrates me, that really annoys me, and makes me really cross that that's happened, because there's all this stuff that's gone into it, and all this work has gone in, and then that has happened, and that just makes me really cross. Is it okay to do that? And you'll notice I use cross, not angry. Okay. Because again, is there some distinction in the word that you use? Is frustrated better than angry? Is cross better than frustrated? And again, I'm back to what's allowed. What language am I allowed to use? Okay, so I said I had 3 intentions for today. One was to provoke thought about to what extent is emotion at work credible in organisations, and what can organisations do about that. 2, to provoke thought in you around how does emotion happen, how does emotion work with you and for you, and then thirdly, to give you some resources and some things that are going to help you into the future. So I hope I've given you some insight into what emotions are, where they come from, how they're triggered, and then in terms of the resources, as I said, I've got them all ready to share with Sarah, so wherever's going to be appropriate to put them on SharePoint or wherever that is, then we can put all of those there for you. Because for me, what I wanted to do today was recognise the power and the potential that emotion at work has. And emotion's going to happen, whether you want it to or not. No matter how much you squish it down, emotion is there and is always going to be there. Because as people, as humans, it's there to help us notice things that are important to our welfare. Emotion enriches our lives and it saves our lives. And you can deny it all you want, but it's always going to be there. And I'm on a quest to help people make different choices so that emotion is something that we can explore and that we can discuss in an open, credible way. Because for me, it's more than a shift from being uncredible to credible. My goal, or my promise, is to get to a point where emotion at work is incredible.